Let's get it going. Well, I'd like to introduce Mike Coffey, client of mine. He's an entrepreneur, human resources professional, licensed private investigator, which is pretty cool, and an HR consultant. He's the president of Imperative, a background screening company serving risk-averse employers. And each week he hosts Good Morning HR podcast. He lives in Fort Worth with his very patient wife and practices yoga and maintains a keto diet. About both of which he'll gladly tell you way more than you want to know. Now, I will tell you this: I tried hot yoga one time, and it almost killed me. It was horrible. I was like the only guy in the class and sweating profusely as all these ladies like glistened and they're just doing their thing and I'm over just dying. It was embarrassing. But for those of you, just a reminder, you don't know me, I'm Mike Maxon, partner here at Simple Numbers, and I haven't done one of these in a while. It's been a crazy busy year. 2022 is just insane in terms of our activity. So it's nice to get back out here and bring a great guest on to discuss one of the fun things we're all going through right now in business, which is hiring, trying to hire, all that fun stuff. So Mike, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Mike. And I am, by 25 years, usually the oldest person in my yoga room. It's hot yoga. And there's nothing that puts you in the right humble state of mind than staring at yourself sweating for an hour in a mirror like that. Yeah. So,
in pain.
Well, I appreciate you having me. This is a presentation. I speak to a lot of HR conferences and do a fair bit of consulting still with our HR clients. And this is a presentation that came about a few years ago as I was just dealing with clients, and they just didn't have good systems in place around how they selected employees, and there were some big gaps that I kept seeing over and over. So I kind of put these 7 steps together. They're not exhaustive. There's other things you should and can do, but these are some tips and tricks for things that mostly around the risk mitigation, the risk management side of hiring somebody, but also just some practical stuff that my clients have had success with, and it's certainly at Imperative we've had success with in our own hiring practice. Now, I need to say it right out front. I'm not a lawyer, and I'm especially not your lawyer. So if I say something today that your lawyer disagrees with, you can always go find another lawyer. But I'm talking about a lot of things that are at a that really work well in Texas and most states. But if you're in California, New York, or a few other places that are less favorable to employers, you probably do want to talk to your counsel before you start changing a lot of your policies. So as an HR consultant, private investigator, and background check company owner, I usually get called in to help a client, a prospective client, a new client, when something's already gone wrong. And they've got some sort of red flag in their process, and either their employment law attorney, their outside counsel, or their HR consultant, something like that, has brought us in, called me up and said, hey, I think we need some help. And so, this is one we had a few years ago that's kind of typical of that. A client, and now it's one of our clients, is a municipality here in North Texas, kind of a high-end bedroom community. The city itself owns a water park and a lot of amenities for their citizens. The police were called out over the weekend to someone's house for a domestic violence call, and they're arresting the husband. He's intoxicated. The wife has clearly been beat up a little bit, and as the police officers putting him in the car, she mentions to him, she says, I don't know why y'all hired him in the first place. He's a registered sex offender. She said, and the officer said, what do you mean we hired him? Does he work for the police department? She said, well, no, but he works for the city. Well, what does he do for the city? Well, he runs our water park. And so the guy, and so turned out the guy was in fact a registered sex offender out of Florida. And he was running the water park that ran all kinds of kids programs and all kinds of things like that for the city. So that Monday morning, the the city manager, the HR director, their outside counsel, and I were sitting down to talk about their employee selection process. And we confirmed that he was a sex offender, but we found that there were just other problems in their process. And a lot of them are things we're going to talk about today. Their employment application process, what they asked of the applicant during any applicant during the interview, and then what they did to try and just verify the basic stuff that the applicant had told them. And so hopefully you've not had those red flags, but we've all had those days, those bad hire days, where we wish we knew then what we know now about the applicant. And we have a website just called badhiredays.com, and it just has the story of people that were hired by employers who didn't know everything about them. This is Angela Cuellar. She was hired by the contractor for the state of Texas, who does all of the fingerprinting for any kind of state licensing or registration. And now when you walk into these facilities to give your fingerprints, they collect your name, date of birth, social security number, address, basically everything you need to steal somebody's identity. And well, lo and behold, she and her boyfriend did that. They stole hundreds of identities, probably thousands of identities of individuals who went to her employer to get fingerprints and gave them all her stuff. What's odd is at the time that they hired her, she was on probation for theft by check. Not theft by check, just straight theft. And so why would you hire somebody and give them all that personally identifiable information for all these citizens, knowing they had that? And when the fact is, they didn't know she had that history. Their background check wasn't thorough enough to identify that. And so she stole a bunch of identities. Matthew Porter, I keep going, all these offenders I mentioned, I think half of them come from Florida. That's, the traditional Florida man. But this guy was working at a church and also was the chaplain at a nursing home. When the nursing home found cameras hidden in the rooms and bathrooms of some residents at the nursing home. And a little investigation turned out it was him. And in fact, he is a former youth minister from Florida who was convicted in Florida of videotaping high school kids when they were in the bathroom at his home. And so he's turned around, he came to Texas, got these jobs, and was doing the same thing here. And again, public record. It's not like it's something that the employer couldn't have known about. They just didn't do their due diligence. And then there's Garth. He was working for a county in Utah as their county administrator. And on paper, he looked highly qualified for it. But then as certain county staff started realizing, and some of the elected officials started realizing, he didn't seem to know what he should have known for somebody with his experience and education background. And they start digging around and they realize not only does he not know this stuff, we're missing a lot of money. And he embezzled over $1 million from the county and had all these degrees he had claimed in his background that he didn't have. And so just verifying his education would have been a big red flag for them that, hey, this guy's not honest. And the gospel according to Coffey, commandment number 1 is if they lie to you coming in the door, it's not reasonable to believe their behavior will change after you hire them. And so they could have avoided all of this if they just verified his education. And we're going to talk about the big Spectrum $7 billion jury verdict from earlier this year in a little bit, and it's the same story. So whatever the applicant tells you, you want to try to verify. We'll dig into that, but the reality is we do background checks to avoid those situations where we get somebody in the door that we later have to let go. And we have a hiring process in place so that we hire the right people for the job that we're trying to fill. You hear from time to time employers talk about wanting to hire the best possible candidate. You'll never hire anybody if you're always waiting for the best possible candidate. There's always, it's like getting married. Sometimes you just have to settle. And fortunately, my wife did settle 26 years ago. But you have to pick the person who will get the job done, and you can't wait forever. But you still want to make sure it's the right, it's a good fit, it's a right fit, and that everything that they've attested to, and that the behaviors and skills that are inherent in who they are and how they conduct themselves, how they're motivated, and all those things. You want to make sure those things meet your company's expectations too. So we're going to talk about that. But sometimes you get the wrong person in the wrong seat, and sometimes through no fault of their own, they're in the wrong seat, and you just got to let them go. And that's expensive to employers from the recruiting side, the management side, because you're bringing in this new employee in. You're spending a lot more management time trying to get them to upskill and to the level where they can work independently. Then you realize they can't, so you draw that out further and try and make them successful. Or your hiring manager just says, oh, well, we'll live with him for now because I just don't have the bandwidth. I don't want to go through the problem of finding somebody. And that's even more expensive. And what you end up sometimes with are office vampires, right? They're just these people who aren't productive. They're often counterproductive in the workplace. They cause drama. They're not carrying their weight, and they're sucking the blood out of your organization. And those are the most expensive employees. The ones who leave, yay, they're gone, whether they leave voluntarily or you have to push them out. But the ones who aren't quite bad enough to fire, or you just can't get your hiring managers to make the decision to do it, they're the most expensive employees you'll ever have, because they don't really produce anything. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm not your lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. I decided to keep my soul. So, but there is around the country, like I mentioned, California and New York, but in a lot of municipalities and counties even around the country, fair chance hiring laws have been passed. And basically what we're doing jurisdiction by jurisdiction is creating a new protected class for employment. And that's people who've had some interaction with the criminal justice system, former offenders, ex-cons, whatever you want to call them, but people who've had criminal history. Now, I'm a big advocate for second chance hiring. I've got training programs for employers on how to do that effectively without creating too much risk in your organization. I've got a training program for former offenders about how to look for meaningful work with a record. So I'm a big advocate for it. But some of these second chance hiring ordinances just make it harder for employers just to make the right risk-based decision about who they hire in an organization. And I've got, like I said, a few webinars on our website and a lot of material out there that may be helpful if you're in one of those jurisdictions. But today we're generally going to talk about the majority of the country, which still doesn't have restrictions on the use of criminal history. But know that that's out there, and always feel free to give me a shout if you get into a situation where you're trying to understand what the ordinances and rules and state laws are wherever you are. And if you're a federal government contractor, and we'll talk about that a little bit, you've got some issues there as well. So when I'm talking about a bulletproof hiring process, I'm talking about a well-informed and legally compliant decision about who you hire and what your process you put those candidates through to help decide who is and who isn't qualified. And so, because you want as much information, and our goal at Imperative is always to give our clients as much information as we can legally give them and that they can legally use. And in a lot of places like California and New York, there's a lot of information I can give my client legally, but they can't legally use it, and I don't want to give them the rope to hang themselves. So you always want to have that conversation. You want to get as much information as you can that you can legally use, but then you want to have a process and a structure to evaluate that information so that you're not using unfairly. If and we'll get into a little bit of this in a little bit, but that whole idea of considering somebody's background on a case-by-case basis, that's often the advice you get even from the EEOC. But if you follow it pretty cavalierly, you're going to end up in a lot of bias and either costing yourself candidates who are otherwise qualified, or you're going to end up with candidates you just really didn't want. And I can, and Mike, as we go through this, I can answer questions as we go if they seem relevant, or I can answer them at the end, whatever. I'll
Okay,
let you monitor that.
sure.
So the first of the 7 steps that I want to talk about is understanding the risk profile of the different jobs in your organization. And so when we're looking at different roles, there are, the kind of access that somebody has in a certain job, what their job responsibilities are, who they interact with, what their level of management is. Those things all affect the risk profile of a job. So a lot of our corporate clients have things go wrong at some point with their cleaning crew, their maintenance staff, their custodial staff. Those are folks who are often in the offices after hours with no supervision, and they've got access to everything, keys to everything, and they can get in and clean stuff and all that. And so I've had clients come into their office on Monday morning and find that stuff's missing, desks have been broken into, things like that. Or they go to their copy machine and they open the copy machine and somebody has been using their color copier to create fake IDs, and they forgot and left all the cut up ID stuff on the glass on the copy machine, things like that. So that's one, so that profile is very different than your sales staff or somebody in accounting who is sitting at an office and maybe they're pretty well supervised, so you don't have those concerns, but they're still making decisions around the organization's finances. They've got access to accounts. Maybe they got access to client information. So that's a different profile than your cleaning staff. But what the big difference is the cleaning staff doesn't make much money, and the accounting staff makes a lot more. And so people say, well, those guys only make $10 an hour. We're not going to do a lot of work on verifying their information. But the reality is they pose just as much threat. It's just a different kind of threat, different risks. And then you've got, of course, your delivery drivers. You've got folks who are out there on the roads operating motor vehicles for you, or even just running hotshot runs for you. Your IT and communications staff, those folks truly have keys to the kingdom. They've got access to your computer networks, to all the information on your servers. And often employers or companies get in trouble because what happens is the people who are working for them aren't actually their employees. Their IT staff is outsourced. They've got an outsourced consulting firm, a managed service provider who's doing a lot of their work. And they don't even know necessarily what the process was in that person getting selected to work for the company, for that vendor. And now they're in your organization. They've got a ton of access. And then you've got employees with access to cash or other easily removable assets. We've got some clients with bonded warehouses, and they can catch people sometimes, walking out the back door and loading stuff up in their cars from the warehouses if they don't have, so you can put as many controls in place as you want, and people are going to find a way to get around them. So the first thing we need to do is evaluate what risks are associated with this role. And this is a tool we've put together, the position risk review checklist. And basically, we're looking at what kind of access does this position have? What level of supervision and interaction with other people does it have? What are the job duties that present risk? Like, do they operate motor vehicle or heavy equipment, or handle cash, things like that? And then we go through and we've got this standard list, and then talking to different clients, we'll add, if a client's got a unique situation. I went up to Maine to consult with a resort up there on the coast earlier this year to help them put this together. And they had a few unique things that I had never worked, never having done that much work in hospitality before. We got involved in helping them, and that's a little different world. You got people who living on site at this resort. You got employees living on site in a kind of a barracks kind of situation. So they're sharing rooms and shared bathrooms and common space. So they had all these employee to employee interactions that you usually don't see plus access to guest rooms and stuff like that. So it's different. But throughout this example, I'm going to use an auto salesperson, a car salesman, an auto sales consultant as an example. So you can see there's a chance in this hypothetical, when it's based roughly on a client that we worked with on that was in this industry, putting their stuff together. But there's a chance that their car salespeople, in the process of gathering paperwork and stuff from clients, will have access to personally identifiable information. So I've got access to the name, date of birth, social security number, address, that kind of information. And your car salesman is going to have access to your computer network, probably just standard access at a user level. They work with intermittent daily supervision. Nobody's breathing down their neck all day long, paying attention to everything that they do, but they're working both on site in the presence of customers and clients, but they're also working off site. They're in a motor vehicle driving around with members of the public and customers out there, and they deal with the public in a different way. So we go through this list, and just these are the ones that present the most risk for this job. And we go through that process and check those. And then we take that list over to this level. And so what you've got here in the bar with the small X's at the top, in those vertical sections, which you really can't probably see too well, those are just the same things we had on this screen. So what access they have, what supervision level they have, what their job responsibilities are, those are all here across the top in the colored bars. And these are the ones we marked. And we said that they had access to PII as part of their job. They've got access to the customers and these different things. And then what we do is go down here and say, okay, the fact that this person has access to PII, what does that tell me about that person's, what kind of past behavior would suggest there's some level of risk, not maybe necessarily even a high risk, but there's some level of risk connected, this past behavior, criminal behavior associates with this risk. So if somebody's got, like this very first one is, they've got access to personally identifiable information. And the first thing on the left, on that left axis, is that crimes against people. Well, the fact that somebody's got access to PII doesn't connect back to the fact that some crimes against people are connected to that. But if they've got some financial crimes or they've got computer crimes, having access to PII is a red flag. And so we just mark that. We say those are X's. Doesn't mean, and I should probably make that a checkbox rather than an X, because I don't want to suggest that just because they've got that in their history, we're not going to hire them. What I'm saying is those are related. And so we just go through that. And also I get clients who will say, hey, well, you've done this for our car dealership before. Can you just give us the one for the car dealership and we'll just use what they've already figured out? And the problem is every organization has different controls in place. And so you don't want to adopt somebody else's risk matrix and their risk tolerance, because it may be very different from yours. I have a client that's a credit union here in Texas, and they don't do background checks on their tellers. And to me, it still makes me crazy that they don't. But their argument is they have such good cash controls, you couldn't steal anything from them. And my argument back to them is always that almost every bank robbery is an inside job, and somebody inside is connected to whoever that bank robber is. And I think I would want to know if somebody had any kind of financial crime or theft or things in their recent history before I put them behind the counter in a bank. But they just said they don't do it. Now they're for their lobby staff, their executives certainly, and all their supervisors. They do a really thorough background checks through us, but they just don't see, basically because of turnover and cost, they just don't think they really need it because they feel like they've got enough controls in place. So every organization's got different levels of risk tolerance and different controls in place. So you want to do this process for your team and for your environment. So then we take that and we'll take it over and we said, okay, so property crimes are connected to the fact that this person's operating a motor vehicle. He's got access to equipment here at the car dealership. So we've got some concern about property crimes, and then we break it down deeper. So you see, under property crimes and under alcohol and computer crimes and drug crimes, we've gone through and said, okay, different things based on their how long ago. And you've got these three colorful columns over there. And the first one is 0 to 3 years. The second one is 3 to 7 years, and the third one is 7+ years. How long ago did the offense happen? And so what we're going to say is, okay, for a car salesperson, we're going to rate these kind of offenses, its general nature, auto theft, burglary, breaking and entering, criminal mischief, all these offenses as high, medium, or low. And so you like see alcohol consumption or possession, like open container in public, things like that. Not a motor vehicle, not a DWI, that's a different offense, but alcohol sales to a minor or public intoxication or open container in public, those kind of things. We're going to call those, you can see over there, even for that first column, 0 to 3 years, we're going to call that low risk. You may not be able to hire a car salesman who doesn't have an alcohol problem. I don't know, but that's, you know, that we're going to call that low risk. That's for this job, we're not going to be particularly concerned about that in and of itself, by itself. It's not a big red flag. But then you see some of these others that are medium risk, drug possession, drug abuse, possession of a controlled substance, and certainly sale and distribution. That's medium risk. This is somebody who has, in the first column, 0 to 3 years. In the last 3 years, they've had some criminal interaction involving drugs, but they're going to be operating a motor vehicle with customers, and they're going to be, not always under supervised. They'll be in a vehicle alone with customers. We're going to call that medium risk. We want to understand the nature of their offense and dig deeper into it before we want to really know what happened. It's going to be medium risk for 0 to 3 and 3 to 7. Then you can see after 7 years, it goes out to low risk. That's just, again, this is the risk tolerance that employer has. Yours may be different. And so, I really try to tell a client, this is what, this should be a high risk. Sometimes I have to tell them, yeah, you're being a little soft here, but usually I'm talking them out of it and saying, maybe we can call this medium risk. And here's what my thoughts are that way. I'm usually trying to get clients to not be as overly concerned as they sometimes are. But then you see up at property crimes, auto theft, and they've called auto theft high risk. If you've had an auto theft in the last 7 years, we think that's high risk for somebody who's going to be working at a car dealership. And you're probably not our best candidate for to be a car salesperson. Now you may be a great repo man for us if we have to go if it's a tote to note place, we have to go repo the cars, but we're not maybe so sure that we're going to put you in a role where you have access to that many motor vehicles. And so, but you can see after 7 years, that one goes to medium risk as well. And so if it's high risk, it still doesn't mean you're not going to hire them. What high risk really means is that we've got to have a real good excuse to hire them, a reason to hire them. We've no other candidates. That'll happen. My engineering clients will sometimes call me and they'll say, hey, when we went through this process, we categorized this as high risk, but we keep hiring these people we've had several instances where we've hired these people that were high risk because we can't find this particular kind of engineer with this experience in the market, and they all happen to have DWIs or whatever. And so then we have a different conversation. Okay, you've got, it's high risk, so you're just going to document why you did it. You're going to document that your management reviewed the reasons for why you put this person in this role, and that we had a conversation about what we can we do to mitigate that risk. Maybe if it's a DWI that's a concern, maybe we just don't let this person drive. I mean, if they're driving a desk all day, that's fine. I don't care about the DWI. But if they're, going to be out visiting clients and seeing people, maybe we always make sure they're with a partner who can drive and that they never operate in the course of business. They never operate a motor vehicle, or at least for some period of time until we as an organization feel more confident that we know how this person operates. So that is a time-consuming process, but I will tell you that it's worth, because what happens is when you get the employment application and you find out about this criminal history, whenever you ask the applicant about it, you already know what risk you've assigned it. You already know you've assigned this as high risk, medium risk, or low risk. And now you don't have you don't run the risk of saying somebody saying, well, yeah, this applicant was in this protected class, and so you just didn't want to hire him because he was black, and your use of criminal history was the reason you didn't hire him. Well, no, we've evaluated the history before we ever met them. And this is the levels that we've assigned to risk. And so, maybe we wouldn't have cared about a DWI, but maybe that 3-year-old DWI, felony DWI didn't matter, but that 6-month-old assault did matter in our environment. And we've categorized that risk before we ever met them. So you've done that, and then you're still going to look at it on a case-by-case basis. What has this person done since then to suggest that they're not the person that made that critical error in judgment 3 years ago or whatever it was? Look at their whole history, but your initial reactions just to the raw risk suggested is already mapped out. So it makes it a lot easier, and you've got specific processes and policies in place so that you know how you're going to deal with it as you go forward. So the next step is the application process. I hate resumes. All resumes are polite lies, and the applicant is putting their best presentation forward to you, but you can't really compare applicant A to applicant B to applicant C based on a resume, because some people don't know what to put on a resume. They're not professional job seekers. And so every now and then I'll talk to an employer and they'll say, oh, well, we really like resumes because they tell us how creative this person is, or their attention to detail when they're creating their resume and all that. No, it doesn't. It tells you that they had somebody who's in HR, or they paid a resume consultant to help put their resume together for them. But that still doesn't necessarily tell you any of the things you want to know, and it doesn't give you information that you ought to have to compare applicants to each other, like termination reason. I think every application should have for every employer, why did you leave here? And we try to get our applications as small as we can, especially if they're still on paper, and as few questions as possible. And we give them just about that much room to write their termination reason and all that. Give them room on there to tell you why they left that employer. And then if they get as far as an interview and they didn't answer that question to your satisfaction, dig into it, understand what was going on when they left that employer, because that may be what you're dealing with in 6 months or a year. You want to understand the circumstances. Now, sometimes they have to say, sometimes a manager and an employee both try to work together, and for whatever reason, they get along and they can't achieve goals together. They both try and it doesn't work, and one of us had to make the choice to leave, and it was me. And that's a perfectly acceptable answer. It's a good reason, but you want to understand it, and you want to get it in writing from them on the application, so that when you go to verify information, you've got exactly what the applicant told you. You're not having to rely on your memory or your hidden scratch notes, and you can go try to verify that information and figure out, were they telling me the truth about that? You hear a lot about the applicant experience, employers who are trying to make the applicant experience so easy and make it so easy for people to apply for jobs. I don't really think you want to do that. I think you want the application process to match the behavior you want for the job. And so, like when I'm hiring an analyst to be a background screen, be a background check analyst, they deal with a ton of detail. That is a job that I would shoot myself. I couldn't do that job. Sit in front of 2 or 3 computer monitors all day long, doing what's mostly high-level data entry, real detailed, high attention to detail. Just not my ADD visionary style. And so we've designed our application process for the analyst roles to be painfully tedious. We ask them to give us detail. We ask them questions that require them to give us answers. And often I don't care what the answers are. What I care about is, can they put a subject and a verb in a sentence with appropriate punctuation and spelling? And so we give them all those opportunities. It takes time. If somebody can't fight through filling out the application online for 15 minutes, that tells me, and they self-select out of the process there, that tells me they probably weren't a good candidate for this role. Now, hiring a salesperson, it needs to be an opportunity for them to talk about themselves and to do as little as possible as far as filling out a lot of information, because that's not your typical sales profile. But if I'm hiring, that's one sales profile, but another sales profile, if I'm doing a really technical sale that maybe takes 6 months to a year to close, maybe I am going to have more detailed process, because I want to see how somebody does following our rules. If I'm in an organization with salespeople who never fill out their CRM, won't keep all their data up to date. You never know what the status of any deal is. And then we're trying to change that. Then maybe I'm going to have an application process that's a little bit more detailed so that I can get more information. But it's really critical, I think, to design the process around the job. And if you're a small to medium-sized employer, you can spearfish this. I mean, that's how you can hire. If I'm staffing a call center with 2,000 people, I'm not going to go through this process necessarily. But for most employers aren't mega, large employers. If you plan the process around the 2 or 3 key jobs that you've got in your organization, you can really get a better fit. If you remember in Men in Black, when Will Smith was applying, you had the Army, the Air Force, and Navy guys all there filling out the application, and he was the guy from NYPD, and they gave him these pencil and paper, and they were doing tests, and it was murder on everybody there, right? But everybody was trying to go strictly by the book, but he was modifying his environment. He was dragging chairs around. He was doing all this, and he ended up getting the job because what that whole process was about identifying their natural behaviors. And what Men in Black didn't want was somebody who was just going to, be a very conventional, traditional person. They were looking for somebody with creative problem solving and all that. It's just a dumb movie, which is still one of the top 5 movies for me. But that process that they designed, that's a good idea for your organization. It doesn't have to be as over the board as that, but think about as you're hiring, what is that application? Don't make it just, so we want as many applicants as we can get. No, what you really want are as many qualified applicants, people and it's not just their past behavior and experience. It's what they can bring to the job today. What's their, how do they perform? We do a behavioral assessment on every candidate before we even ever talk to them. And if somebody comes across as my behavioral style, real up there, extroversion, very low attention to detail, not a rules follower, I know they're going to be a horrible analyst. I'm not going to put them through it. If I've got 15 other candidates who meet the profile of what I'm looking for, I'm going to talk to those folks first. And that builds, for me, a great candidate pool. And usually if they get through all our application process well and our behavioral assessments, I can hire them without even interviewing them. The interviews, to your managers, interviews hurt them more than they help them, quite honestly, because they're not really good interviewers. And so having a process that makes it easier to cull out the worst and identify the most compliant to what you're looking for, as far as the best conforming to the behavior set you're looking for the job, will make your job a lot easier. And then we get to the icky stuff, the stuff that employers never want to do. Is they want to, you got to ask the hard questions. Tell me about your criminal history, and that should be in writing. In most places in the country, you can still have an employment application, but in the chance hiring places, you can't. Austin, Texas, you can't ask about criminal history till you made an offer. Now think about that. You're bringing somebody into your workplace, and you're interviewing them and all that, and you've got no clue what their criminal history is. You select them. You're 3 or 4 weeks down the road now with this candidate. You make the offer, and then you ask them about their criminal history, and you find out they've got something that is high risk for this job. Do you go back and look at your other candidates again? They've probably already found other roles, especially in this job market. So delaying that question, I don't recommend, except where you legally have to. I like it right there on the application, because I'm going to look at the whole applicant, their experience, their education, and criminal history, and whatever other skills that they have and credentials, all as one compared to all the other applicants I've got, and look at the whole picture for everybody at the same time. But this is the question on a lot of employment applications, and it's a horrible question. Have you been convicted of a felony in the last 7 years? Well, first, we're only talking about convictions. Okay, conviction means somebody pled guilty to the offense or was found guilty by a court. But the reality is, you've also got deferred adjudications, and that means the individual pled guilty to the offense or no contest and served probation. And at the end of the probation, the case was dismissed. Now, is your concern as an employer whether they were convicted or not, or did did they engage in this activity? And that's the whole point about criminal history. It tells you about that person's past behavior, and you're trying to project what their past behavior looks like into what they may do in your role. And so deferred adjudication is in almost every state something you can legally look at. You can't in California and a few other places, but where you can, I think you ought to look at deferred adjudications. But the person who's just got a conviction, he can answer this question, or who's got deferred adjudication but no convictions. Maybe he's been on deferred 3 or 4 times. Maybe he's on deferred right now. He can answer this question, no, but you're missing it there. And now there's still times where you may care about dismissed cases, because again, even the EEOC says an employer can consider this non-conviction information if it's reasonable to believe the person engaged in that conduct. So the case is dismissed. Cases get dismissed for a lot of reasons besides the person not being guilty. So let's find out why it was dismissed. Ask the applicant what happened. Often they will tell you what they did, and that what they tell you may be enough for you to make a decision based on what they told you, that behavior, the behavior they just described is alarming enough for you to say, well, yeah, we're going to look at other candidates. But you want to understand why it was dismissed, and your background screening company should be able to help you figure that out. But a lot of background screening companies aren't reporting deferred adjudications or convictions. So you want to make sure that you know what you're getting from your screening company as well. And then it only asks about felonies. Now, again, if we're interested in the underlying conduct more than we're interested, in what the class of the offense was, we're going to be better off. So what did this person do, and what does that behavior tell me about what the role is? For instance, in Texas, your third DWI is a felony. So if you got your third DWI 5 years ago, and all you're going to be doing is driving a desk in our organization, we probably don't care about that DWI if there's nothing else out there of concern. But a misdemeanor may be a real concern. A misdemeanor assault, a misdemeanor theft, multiple misdemeanor thefts. This person could say, no, they didn't have a felony conviction, but those misdemeanors, especially if they were in the last 6 months or 2 years, may be a lot of concern for you. And so you want to asking just about, felonies is a mistake. And then we asked of convictions in the last 7 years. And so you care about it if it was 7 years ago, but not 7 years and 1 day ago. That's another thing that I see a lot of employers do, and that's California's law, and it's crazy to me because somebody was charged with sexual assault or murder or embezzlement of millions of dollars 7 years and 1 day ago. An employer can't legally use that in California. It's nuts, but that's their rules. But in most of the country, you can. And so limiting stuff to 7 years, there may be stuff that's truly relevant, and it's more than 7 years ago. And that's why but if you've got that matrix, you've already defined what the risk is based on the age of the offense. So if they tell you about, I got a DWI 15 years ago, according to our matrix, that's low risk. We don't care. But and you've given an applicant an opportunity to tell you. Now, I mentioned the EEOC a couple times. They did publish in 2012 a guidance for employers on the use of criminal history. And basically, I've got a whole hour-long webinar that gets into what they talk about. But basically, they want you to look at the age of the offense, how long ago it happened, what the underlying conduct was, what did they do, and how does that relate to the risk associated with the job you're considering that person for. And then they want you to have the applicant give them an opportunity, at least, to give you their side of the story. And often their side of the story is, well, that was 5 years ago, and here's what I've done since then. I've held down my job, a steady job. I got a degree, or I got these certifications, or look, I even bought a house. I've set down roots, and whatever whatever they can say that demonstrates maybe that the person who made that critical error in judgment 5 years ago isn't who they are today. Now, the EEOC document is strictly guidance for employers, and so I always want my clients to put their hat to it and be fair in that consideration. But they also have some kind of crazy ideas in there, ban the box, taking the criminal history out of the process until the offer's made and things like that. I try to dissuade my clients from that where they legally can. But if you're a federal contractor and you've got OFCCP requirements, the OFCCP has adopted the EEOC's guidance as their contractual expectation for contractors. So you probably want to pay a lot more attention to that detail if you're an OFCCP contractor. And as I mentioned, you've got ban the box around the country. So you want to make sure you know what you can legally consider where you're located. That includes the kind of offenses you can consider and the age of the offenses. And you want to ask the criminal history question when you legally can ask it. And you don't want to do it earlier, because there are a lot of plaintiffs lawyers who are specializing in bringing these kind of class action lawsuits against employers who just have the question at the wrong part in their process, or have some other failure in their background check process, so they're not following some legal requirement. And now the next step is once you've got your application document, that you've got the criminal history question, the applicants have told you their name and their identity information. They've told you where they've worked previously, where they studied, and they've given you some idea of what their skills were and their responsibilities to other jobs. And they've also answered your criminal history question. The next thing is actually you need to read that and pay attention to it. It's amazing to me how often even our own clients will call me and say, "Oh, we just got the background check back on this guy, and he's got a criminal offense that we didn't know about." And my first question is, "Well, did you ask him about it?" And they're like, "Yeah, it's on the application." "Well, what did he put on the application?" "I don't know. They haven't looked at it." And so they go back and look. "Oh, look, he told us about that DWI, and we really aren't concerned about it. But now that we know he told us, we feel okay about it." So go back and before early in the process, look at what they tell you, and see if it's relevant. This guy is Michael Gilbert. He's one of our bad hire days guys. He was hired as a non-medical caregiver, a sitter, to sit with elderly patients by a staffing agency that sent those people to people's homes and nursing facilities and things like that. On his employment application, they had a criminal history question. And Michael Gilbert wrote the two magic words, "Will discuss." Instead, it said, "Have you ever had a criminal history, blah, 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 will discuss." So they get to the interview, and the recruiter asks Michael Gilbert, "So tell me about what's this?" You said, "We'll discuss what's the criminal history." And he told her, because we know this because she wrote it down on the application itself, Michael says this was something minor from years ago. And she didn't ask any other questions, because we get liver quiver, right? You don't ask those icky questions about people's past stuff. And so she just wrote that down, and she thought that was enough. Well, it turns out Michael Gilbert was a registered sex offender, and he was on federal community release for an offense of trying to fake his own death at sea, because when he was getting prosecuted in Louisiana for the sex offense, he tried to fake his death out on a boat out at sea, and they caught him on there too. And so he's a bad dude. And now they're sending him in unknowingly to sit with vulnerable Alzheimer's patients in an Alzheimer's care facility. Within about a month after he had been there, one of the elderly patients, 77-year-old Alzheimer's patient female, was acting out, and they did some tests and an exam, and they realized that she had been sexually assaulted. And these sitters that they have their photos there beside the bed so that the Alzheimer's patients would recognize that person, I guess. And so they gather these photos up, and he starts showing them to her, and she breaks down crying when she gets to Michael Gilbert. And the police are there, and the police run him and realize, hey, why is he even working here? That whole thing. And so everybody got sued in this story: the nursing home, the staffing agency, Michael Gilbert, but he didn't have anything. They couldn't prosecute him. Everybody else settled, but they couldn't prosecute him because they didn't have any physical evidence other than the fact that she'd been assaulted. But nothing, you're not going to put an Alzheimer's patient up on the stand to testify. They didn't have anything that directly tied her injuries to him. And so he didn't get prosecuted for this case. And so I've been talking about Michael Gilbert for a couple decades now, since the early aughts. And this picture is it was his booking photo, and I've been using it. And so I opened the local newspaper one morning, back still when we had paper newspapers, so it's probably been 10 years or more. And he's on the front page. That picture's on the front page, and he had been investigated for. He was under investigation for another sexual assault case, and he tried to fake his own death again. He kidnapped a homeless man, put him in his car, and killed him and burned the car to try to fake the guy's death. But he had to go see his girlfriend one last time before he skipped town, and she called the police on him. But so he's not going to be your next applicant. That's the good news. But this is what you want to follow up on those questions and understand, read the applications and really dig deep to understand in the interview what really happened there, and tell me about your side of the story, and get it in writing from them. And then when they tell you they got a criminal history, we go back to matrix and we say, look, auto theft is high risk in here. So we've got a process in our organization for evaluating something for this job that we call high risk. But low risk, this alcohol possession, that's a low risk. We're not concerned about that in and of itself. And so you've already got the process in place, so you can evaluate this. So when you're looking at 5 applicants and one of them tells you this, you can say, oh, he's low risk. We don't care about that. We're going to go continue to evaluate him. But, oh, this guy's high risk and everybody else is low risk. We're going to look at our low risk candidates first. And then the next step is, after you examine the information they get, verify it. We see more people lying about their education than we see lying about their criminal history. And again, the gospel according to Coffey, commandment number 1 is, if they lie to you coming in the door, it's not reasonable to believe that their behavior will change after you hire them. And so if they lie to you coming in the door, you want to do the background check and catch that. First thing you do, though, is get their authorization to do the background check and make sure it's legally compliant. The Fair Credit Reporting Act has really specific requirements, and a lot of employers are getting sued because they're not following them. It's really easy to follow. If you're working with a good background screening company, they should give you all the tools to do that. And you want to make sure you get that authorization, because it just creates a lot of liability for your organization if you're not doing it right. You've got to disclose to them on a separate document that you're going to do the background check, and then you've got to get their written authorization to do so. And then you actually run the background check. And running the background check, or verifying the information, because it may not be even running the background check. You may do the employment verifications in-house. That's smart in a lot of situations. Calling a previous employer. If I call a previous employer up and I'm the hiring person who's going to manage this person, they're much more likely to give me the real scoop on that person's behavior than if my background screening company calls. We get adverse information from previous employers about people. We get termination reasons and stuff like that on occasion. But I know from my own experience, you're going to get better information if you will make the time and you actually pick up the phone and call that previous employer. But then you want to verify their education, their schools, because like I said, we see a ton of people creating degrees. Either they dropped out or they never even attended the school. And you want to make sure that you're verifying that. Even if the degree is not required, if they told you they got a degree and you find out that they lied to you about having that degree just so that they seem more competitive or something, then that tells you a lot about the character of the person you're hiring. And then, of course, you do want the criminal history. And if you've asked the criminal history question already, all the background check is doing, even on the criminal background check, is verifying what they've told you. And there should be no surprises. If you've got a good process on the front end, there should be no surprises from the background check. But here's what happens. This Spectrum Internet, which is Charter, was hired somebody, and he made a service call for them and returned later and robbed and murdered the woman who lived in the house that he had helped install internet service to. The family sued, and they demonstrated that, in fact, he had no criminal history, but what he didn't have, that he lied about, his employment history was bogus. And if Spectrum had just picked up the phone and called those previous employers, they would have seen that he was lying about his employment history, and they would have never hired him, never sent him to that person's house, and he would have never had the opportunity to meet her and go back to rob her and ultimately kill her. $7 billion. It's a big judgment for, I don't think my family would go for 7 billion. They wouldn't think I was worth it, but 7 billion is a lot of money. Now the judge just did reduce that last month, I think, to 1.1 billion, but that's still a lot of zeros. And all they had to do, and that's, I think, what incensed the jury, is all they had to do is pick up and verify his employment, and they would have known that there was something wrong with the student. So that's the next step, is actually try to verify that information. And then the final step, this goes to applicant experience as much as anything, is treat the people with respect. If they've got a criminal history they tell you about, or you don't hire them because you get a better qualified candidate, whatever it is, don't ghost them. There's so many employers out there getting roasted in their communities because they're ghosting applicants. You bring somebody in, they apply, that's one thing. Maybe you send them an email saying, hey, we've gone with other candidates. But especially when they've taken the time to maybe get off their current job, to come in and do interviews and, you know, spend time with your team, and you choose somebody else, that's fine. But don't ghost them. Treat them with respect. And because you never know where your next candidate referral is coming from. And if you treat that applicant really well, and even if you don't hire them, they may come back for another job at a different position, at a different time. They may, but they, at the very least, they may never say a positive thing about your organization to anybody, but they may not run you down if you treat them with respect. But they're going to mention to their friends, you know, they brought me in for 2 interviews over there, and then I never heard from them again. I hear that all the time, and that's horrible for your brand, and it's not what I'm going to do. And sometimes you can actually help the applicant. Hey, we chose this other applicant, and just so you understand, this is what was really strong in that applicant. There's nothing wrong with that. And as long as you're not saying, well, this applicant was white and you were black, and so we chose the white guy. Don't do that. Don't make choices that way. But you know, there's times where you can help them. And if they leave feeling like you gave them some valuable information, something that either can help them or at least helps them understand the situation, they are less likely to believe you made the decision because of some sort of unfairness. And when people think they weren't treated fairly, that's when they talk to plaintiffs' lawyers. So treat them with respect. It's very inexpensive. It'll cost you some time, but it's worth it. So all my slides are pictures. So if I sent you the presentation, it wouldn't have anything for you to have. But the whole ebook on this is available for free on our website, and you can just download it. It's about 35 pages long or something, and it's got the tools that I used in here, and
awesome.
Should be helpful. So that's me. I'll answer any questions or anything anybody might have.
Yeah, you answered that regarding the matrix and everything, so we're good there. I got a couple. Just I wanted to ask the behavioral style that you give people, that's fully legit to like rule people out on that.
What you're doing is you're selecting the right candidates. You're talking to these people first. And
okay.
So what I'm favoring employees who match us. Now, the EEOC, if you talk strictly to them, they want you to have done these really exhaustive psychological studies about what really proves success in your organization and all that. And you can do that. It's expensive and time consuming.
Oh yeah.
But there are good assessments out there that give you good insight, you know, into the big 5 kind of behavior things. But at least, you know, DISC covers, you know, dominance, introversion, steadiness, and conscientiousness. Those are great. I'm a high D, high I, low S, low C. Predictive index basically is DISC with different letters. There's a lot of culture index is great, and a lot of EOers use culture index and swear by it. There are really good assessments out there. Now, you have to really, and so you're not shooting yourself in the foot. You've got to have really good processes in place to really understand what makes somebody successful in that role and why. Sure. So like we built our profile for our background screening clients or our analysts. We looked at our best performers. Who are our best 5 performers, and what does their profile look like? And every one of them had the exact same profile. And we found that every time we use a different profile, like somebody really is impressive because of their experience or their history, and we say, okay, we're going to look past this profile, and it's never worked for us as well as having somebody who meets that. We probably do miss some diamonds in the rough, but I know we're kissing a lot fewer frogs along the way. Sure. Really having this behavior pattern that really works for us and for those roles.
Nice. What about So me being in financial services, is there anything you get from like insurance companies? So what I mean is, if we're obviously keeping books for clients, doing tax returns, moving money around, probably ain't it best to hire anyone with past financial history, right? I mean, whether it's in the last
Well,
7 years or
yeah, well, I
not.
would see what it is.
Okay.
There's if you have what they call a bright line rule, where you just say we're not going to hire anybody with this history period.
Mm,
The EEOC wants to see that you've at least tried to evaluate that, and some people are, if they've, if one thing happened 15 years ago and that's all that's happened, depending on the size of the offense, but when they were 18 years old, they got caught stealing from the register at the retail store they were working at, and it's been, it's 18. They're 38 now or 33 now, and they've been consistently employed. They got a college degree. Then I'm probably not going to be concerned about it. Now, if somebody
sure.
embezzled $1 million 15 years ago,
Yeah.
no, you don't get that job.
Right.
And so I'd be more along the lines of a sexual assault. You're never working with kids.
Right. Oh yeah.
I'm
for
sorry.
sure.
That's the bottom line. Or any vulnerable adults or people who, and I would really be concerned even making somebody a supervisor in an organization where it's primarily a female population they'd be supervising.
Mm.
And there was a restaurant here in Texas a while back that had a case where they had a bar manager who was they didn't know had a violent sexual past. And one night he invited a bunch of people over to his apartment after, for an after party after they closed the place down. And he and one of the female waitresses hung out a little longer than everybody else. And next thing you know, she's been assaulted. And they, that's probably, something that they should have at least known about and thought through before they put somebody in that role of trust with the organization. So
Sure.
there's different offenses, but I just think you want to look at at the offense, and then you want to look at the whole applicant and say, I'm just going to look at the best, I'm going to look at the best candidates I've got right now.
Mm.
And this person may be number 5 instead of number 3 now because that history and these other 4 or 5 people don't have it. So that's kind of how I suggest looking at it.
One more thing. Just to clarify, you actually like a job application where people fill out and drive essentially the resume that way versus them handing you a resume, correct?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
That way you're comparing, all your applicants are answering the exact same questions every time. So
Okay.
I can compare this applicant to this applicant, and I've asked them all the same questions initially. And so I'm evaluating who I'm going to talk to next fairly. And it's not just based on what this applicant failed to tell me or failed to volunteer.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. Awesome. Well, all right. Well, hold on. We got one more here. Chat has indicates, not sure if there's just saying the same thing or not. I'm going to good morning HR and don't see a downloads place to get the booklet.
Oh no, I'm sorry. It's on the good morning. It's on Imperative. It's right there. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, imperativeinfo.com. So
yeah,
the chat.
Yeah, the ebook's on it. Yeah, it should be on the homepage at imperativeinfo.com.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, he got it. Cool. Awesome. Well, Mike, thank you very much. That was great. I took a lot of notes there. Excellent stuff. So to everyone here, I will post this, send it to all those who signed up, and I'll be sending out another Simple Numbers webinar thing. But Mike, really appreciate it. Thanks a lot, and I'll be talking to you soon. You're welcome.
Be careful.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.